Hi, I'm Leah Lockhart, and I am a freelance design researcher based in Glasgow, Scotland. I have an interest in something called design justice, and it's something that I am centering my practice around. And that is a framework and a set of principles and a global network of people who are working toward greater equity in the things that we design. So better distribution of the benefits and the harms in products, services, policies, whatever it is that we have the influence and the power to create things that affect people's lives. And we are joining forces, I guess, is a bit of movement making to understand how practically we can turn a critical eye to traditional ways in which we conduct user research and design things. And how can we include the people and the communities who will be most impacted by the things that we make. And I'm really interested in Privilege Cafe and what's going on there. And partly because I'm interested in reflection and reflexive practice, especially with people in certain positions and positionalities, overrepresented people who may have just become alive to some of the issues that exist in the world with regard to social justice, for example. And it seems to me that Privilege Cafe is a space where some of this is sparked, some of these conversations happen, where people can exercise that reflexivity and be affected by the reflections that they have because of the stories they hear or the people that they meet there. And I suppose my question for Privilege Cafe and for Mymuna would be about anything that's coming back about how people are being affected by conversations, how their practice changes, how pennies drop, and yeah, what kind of stories are coming out about that, and how are people feeling after being in discussion?
Oh, thank you so much, Leah. And yeah, my name is Mymuna Soleman. So I'm of Somali origin, but I was born and bred in Wales, so I live in Cardiff. I'm really passionate about, I guess, all things equality and diversity, and just giving a voice to women like me, and who look like me or sound like me or have a similar name, and just really helping women like me have our voices heard in spaces where we're usually shunned out of. So yeah, anything to do with equality and diversity, representation, and all that sort of stuff, I'm really passionate about. And it was the main reason why I created the Privilege Cafe, which is just a virtual cafe, which is on Zoom every single week. And we have different discussions on different topics around unconscious bias, justice system, education, everything really, which is underpinned by privilege and race, white privilege and race in particular. I mean, we've had so many different discussions, and lots of expertise and knowledge and lived experience in particular is shared in this space. And yeah, I think just on that question, Leah, I feel like for me, I think the biggest sort of like, I wouldn't say achievement, because I genuinely have these conversations with people, I guess, even before Privilege Cafe. It just wasn't Privilege Cafe at that time. But in terms of, yeah, just people having honest reflections and, getting feedback from people saying, Mymuna, this is the first time, we've actually even thought about what whiteness means and what it means to be white. And we're having conversations with our families at the table, or Mymuna, we're changing our policies, and what we're doing now was those conversations are sparked, and you've planted the seed with us in work, and we're changing our strategies, for example. And for me, that's a huge achievement from what I thought was just a conversation on a Zoom every single Thursday back in March last year. So yeah, I just feel like people, their confidence is growing coming into this space. And like I said, they genuinely probably have never been asked what it means to be white, for example. So yeah, I mean, just that knowledge sharing and confidence building for people that I feel already have a lot of power and privilege, that I would, I guess, maybe expect them to already be knowledgeable in these areas, but I guess not necessarily the case when they come to a safe space like the Privilege Cafe. I feel like, people are totally different, and they're true to themselves, and they're speaking their truth. And I feel like that's what the Privilege Cafe has been a catalyst for in so many different spaces and conversations. So yeah, I feel like definitely the Privileged Cafe is a space for that. So yeah, my question to you, Leah, is this notion of what you described as design justice, and what that means for public services, and how I guess people can really relate to that. And what if I say to someone who doesn't really know anything about that, the layperson, what does design justice mean for you? What does that really look like? And also maybe just a similar question, which is a bit broader, like why do you think public services have to wait for like a tragic event like a murder in order for them to sort of fill the gaps that they knew that were already there in the first place, that they created?
I'll start with the last question first. Why do public services have to wait for tragedy and human suffering to be amplified to have these discussions or move into this space? And I think it is something about public services have been created by certain people for certain people, and we have a legacy and a DNA that we carry with us. And it's like you say, overrepresented people probably populate public services, and they have never been asked about their power and privilege and their position. And they spend a lot of time. And in fact, the work that I'm commissioned to do quite a lot is external facing. It's looking to communities to see how can we engage with the Black communities? How can we engage with disabled communities, queer communities, tick the box communities? And I like to turn that question around and ask why they're not here now. Why are these relationships why do they not exist now? What's gone on there? What's happening in your culture? What's happening in you that means you don't have these relationships? Let's start there. And that is part of what design justice helps me do. It gives me a language, a framework, and a community of people to start to unlearn and see things that I've had blind spots about for a long time, because I also wasn't having these sort of critical discussions about my practice, about my positionality, about my proximity to people in power that I can use in different ways to be more inclusive and make things more accessible. And so I've kind of moved into this space where I'm that woman who's always asking the harder questions and asking other white people to reframe how they might be seeing something, asking other able-bodied people how they might reframe something, on and on and on. And so design justice is a set of principles, it's a practical set of principles, it's a framework to help organize these thoughts and conversations. And I think for public service that fits quite well, because it is an organized way to address things that are really quite hard. And it does use the language of design. Some people feel it is quite academic. So one of the things I try to do is bring these things to a conversational and relational place where we can put the ideas in context to help people challenge themselves. So it's that reflection and then the reflexive that I'm kind of on a mission to ride alongside people and have that journey while I'm learning myself. Yeah, I hope that answers.
So fascinating because so many things were sparked in my head as you were speaking there. And, lots of organizations that I work with, and for example, either working with people for events or public services when I actually work in the public sector, and asking those questions that you said. And, for example, why have you not got a prayer room, when you might have people of faith in your organization? Why was that not part of the design process in the first place? And I guess the work you're doing is just so fascinating because it's basically bringing the people that were on the menu for such a long time to the table to actually to speak up and actually be part of the conversation rather than be added on halfway through when you realize that things ain't going to plan. I mean, yeah, it's just reversing that process. It's really fascinating, the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing that.
Hey, maybe I'll introduce myself. I'm Maha Bali. I'm an associate professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching of the American University in Cairo. So I'm here in Egypt, working at an American institution. So talk about colonialism, which has mixed faculty from the US and Egypt and other parts of the world. And the majority of students are Egyptian. I am also the co-founder of something called Virtually Connecting and something called Equity Unbound. They're both open projects, and they're both social justice focused, but I'll focus on Equity Unbound for now. Equity Unbound started out as a partnership between myself, an educator in the US called Mia Zamora, and an educator in Ireland called Catherine Cronin. And what we were seeing is a lot of people were studying digital literacies and doing intercultural learning experiences without, first of all, without prioritizing social justice in the conversations, and this can create a really inequitable kind of intercultural exchange. And the other one was when they did it virtually, they were not making use of open and connected learning. So initially, Equity Unbound was an equity-focused, open, connected intercultural learning curriculum. It was a curriculum you could see like different topics that you could do in your classes, different resources, different activities, and it was all open. And what was happening is that the classes we were teaching would engage with these resources, and then other people in the world could also join in if they wanted to. And some of our events were synchronous and some of them were not. This was way before COVID. So, we could bring in guest speakers and students would speak to them in an open dialogue and be able to engage with really high profile folks in just a very informal conversation. And we keep these open to anyone else. That's what we started out doing a couple of years ago, and we were integrated in our courses. And any educator who was interested was welcome to contribute activities, to join in, and we started to grow the number of people who were interested and who could have a say in how the curriculum went. And that was really important to us. First of all, selecting content that was diverse and from people from all over the world, especially from marginalized communities, and prioritizing those voices, but also that the contributors to the curriculum itself, originally the three of us, all of us women, two of us women of color, one of us from the Global South, which is me, but the others joining us were also in that kind of person, right? So what you were talking about, Leah, is like who's in the conversation, who has the power of decision making, who has parity of participation. We're hoping and we're trying to mainly be those non-white dominant people. But then when COVID happened, we decided that we needed to bring in care into the conversation of moving remotely. So we decided to start out this continuity with care. We crowdsourced ways of moving online with care, and we held some conversations with students and faculty about well-being and so on. And then George Floyd and Black Lives Matter resurgence happened. And like you say, we shouldn't wait for these things to happen. They've been happening for a long time. But having that situation, that the fact that everyone stopped, we decided another project of socially just academia to bring people to talk about these things and to talk about at the micro and the macro level. Like what's happening on the macro level, what can you do in your classroom? How does that connect to what's happening in the world? And I think this relates a bit also to what both of you were saying, is what Mymuna was saying about Privilege Cafe, is having these conversations on the micro level are helping people take policy decisions and make systemic change. And the last of these projects is a community building resources to help people when they move online to build community if they've never done that before. And again, we do it with what we call intentionally equitable hospitality. Think about who are the students you have in your class who are furthest from justice, and how do you create an environment that is inclusive and hospitable and open to them. And I'm going to stop here.
I'm just feeling overwhelmed by the incredible sort of effort and like passion, and I just keep thinking movement, right? And then now I'm thinking about ripples, because you've mentioned macro and micro, and this is a conversation I have quite a lot, because people whose eyes are just being opened to certain things, especially their own practice and how they might be unintentionally usually reinforcing inequities and inequalities, especially in public service. It's a lot, and it feels overwhelming and confusing, and you're questioning everything. But I always find it really useful to talk about that ripple, the micro. Where do you have agency? Where is your moral compass showing you is the right way to point? And where are the things that you can first within yourself before going out and working with colleagues or people in communities? What needs to happen here first? And that is, on the grand scale, a really small thing, but it will be quite impactful to someone else. And I talk to Alexis quite a lot, and I think it frustrates her that I talk about the things we want to see probably won't happen while we are in these jobs, while we are on this earth. But can we prepare the ground? And what are the ways in which we are preparing ground for people who come behind us, being good ancestors?
I think even with the cafe, like I feel like lived experience and case studies is what's impacted people the most, especially lots of white privileged people that I've come across. And if you can't relate to something, you can't understand it. And if you can't understand it, you can't really provide a good service and an inclusive service that you claim to provide on your website or, wherever that may. I've literally reached out to people and said, you're not really inclusive, so you need to remove that off your website until you actually become inclusive. And what are the steps that we need to do to continue to actually achieve that? So yeah, I feel like lived experience and lived wisdom has had a big impact on so many people that have actually come to the cafe, and conversations that I have outside of that, and really have I guess opened their eyes, and then it's just holding them people to account in terms of what they actually say they're going to do, and just following that whole journey with them. And this whole thing about allies, I don't like to call people allies. I think being an accomplice is totally different. So yeah, definitely. Just wanted to add that.
I just used that in the conversation yesterday. Mymuna talking about being an accomplice, and I learned that first from D. Ray McKesson, talking about being an ally is almost like you standing across the street from somebody and waving and saying, I hope you get free someday. But that being an accomplice is that next step of putting something on the line. What are you risking, or what are you challenging personally? Is it financial? Is it reputational? What is it? That is the place we need to start moving to get away from this, maybe sometimes, most of the times performative action.
I mean, this whole thing about people don't need, I've said to people, you don't really need a pat on the back and a medal. You've got enough privilege anyway. So I think it's about actually acknowledging the privilege that you have and how you can actually use that privilege for good then. And if you come to my cafe and say you'll be able to help people find jobs, not just saying it to show face and being a tourist or whatever, which tourists are banned anyway from my cafe, but just actually reaching out after the cafe and saying, well, actually, I've got time to book out here to do applications with people or look over CVs, and then continuing that and saying, we've got a budget, for example, to actually do internships, and just really continuing that whole journey rather than just saying something.
So this is, again, the importance of working at both the micro and the macro levels, right? What can you do that's within your control and influence right now? How can you embody these values of social justice? And then also, what are the systemic issues? And again, what kind of power and control or influence do you have to help those? And so going back to those sowing seeds and nurturing them, you can, in your own context, within your own power, actually make a change of a certain level. But then the systemic change takes a lot more time. But you need to find your place there, find how much work you can do as an advocate and how much you can do yourself, how much you can embody and model for other people, but also how much control might you have over influencing policies in your institution, or how much public scholarship can you do, like what Mymuna is doing with the Privilege Cafe, like all of us are doing, to influence more people, wider people outside of our own institutions. And sometimes that can come back into our institutions once we've had it out in the world.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I agree 100%. So to those listening, I would say definitely for me is to, and something that I advocate for is to ask the question, ask, any opportunity that you have, asking that question will definitely fill that gap of knowledge and ignorance. And no question, I always say no question is a stupid question. And when I've made people feel at ease in the cafe, like, people are really nervous, and I realized that fear is a huge barrier for people, and this whole notion of fearing to offend people stops that new space for learning and growing. So ask the question, even if you think it's offensive most of the time. Ask anyway.
I want to pick that up from Mymuna and encourage people to do some work. I think that I went to a talk the other week. It was a panel discussion that included Sarah Fahtala. She's one of I just love her as a user researcher who's really been part of my learning, really valuable to me. But somebody asked her, how can white allies or allies in user research teams who include people of color, how can they be more helpful, more alive to issues, more sensitive to things that go on. And she says, what did the internet tell you? What did Google say? Before you come to me or come to someone else, expecting them to carry the burden of educating you, just look online real quick, do some learning. And one of the things I wanted to share was something called the Designer's Critical Alphabet. And that is, it's great. So Leslie Ann Knoll has made a deck of cards, a physical tactile deck of cards, but it's also now a website that I think for people who are just starting on this sort of like critical reflection, reflexive journey is a really, really useful resource. And it is criticalalphabet.com. It is a beautiful thing. It's a living thing, so it's growing all the time, but it is alphabetical. So every day, perhaps as an inspiration to start your day, you could visit this website, have a look at the concept, the idea under that letter for that day. And she also includes a set of questions. So it can be something you can use to journal. It can be a reflexive thing that's really quite practical. So I would encourage people, alongside asking questions, do some work as well.
Okay, I love the critical alphabet, and I would say some of the work is not in just reading up. Some of the work is in having ongoing engagement with the thoughts of marginalized populations. This might be actually interacting with them on social media, but that might not be easy if you're not already part of communities. But like making a point, if you're going to read a blog post today, prioritize the blog posts of people of color and marginalized communities and women before you read all the white people that we're used to listening to all the time, because the epistemic listening to this alternative voice is not easy. The first time you read it, you won't get it. You have to engage with it deeply and sustainably. And then listen, read hashtags like Black Lives Matter and so on before you engage, before you, especially if you're going to critique, you wait and you try to listen and understand before you participate. So reading is good, but engaging as well with the thoughts and with the communication between Black folks and marginalized folks in general. All right, thank you guys so much for this conversation.
Thank you. It's been really great. Yeah, just one other thing. Yeah, definitely on the back of what you said about engaging and speaking to people regularly. Check yourself. Yeah, checking yourself regularly is essential and key. So thank you so much for listening. It's been really interesting to hear the work that you're both doing and how what we've said really, there's so many interconnections there. It's been really fascinating. Thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.